it is now official. For the first time ever in this country, a black woman, Ketanji Brown Jackson, will sit on the Supreme Court.
On this vote, the yeas are 53, the nays are 47, and this nomination is confirmed.
That is the final vote being read by Vice President Kamala Harris with a smile to make Judge Jackson the 116th justice in the court's history. She watched the vote at the White House. There she is there. You see her with President Biden. Just an historic moment. We're going to hear from them tomorrow at the White House. But you might be asking yourself, wait a second, Hal, why are you still calling her judge? Well, she's not a justice just yet. She actually can't officially take over until the summer when Justice Stephen Breyer steps down. That's important, by the way, because this is a judge who's considered more liberal, replacing a justice who's considered more liberal. So the ideological balance of the court stays the same. And listen, for the White House, it is a win, right? A confirmed pick with a cherry on top, a bipartisan confirmed pick, technically, because you had three Republicans, the three you see here, Susan Collins, Lisa Murkowski, Mitt Romney, joining all 50 Democrats in confirming Judge Jackson. We're going to talk more with Yamiche Alcindor about the historic nature of this nomination, but I want to go to Garrett Haake first, live on Capitol Hill. Garrett, help us come inside the room, inside the chamber, right, as this entire process wrapped up, including this moment where, like, one semi-rogue senator who was apparently not even in the building was a little bit late to the roll call here.
Yeah, Hallie, look, this, I think, was a day of a mix of joy and relief for Judge Jackson's supporters, mostly Senate Democrats, but not entirely. And you heard it in the room. That kind of cheer is so rare for the Senate, that kind of raw emotion. I think back to Cory Booker kind of teeing it up in the confirmation hearings, that we would see joy when Judge Jackson was confirmed to be the future Justice Jackson. And you very much heard that in the room. You had all the pomp and circumstance of a big Senate vote. You had the Vice President presiding over the Senate, and you had the Majority Leader asking all senators to be butts in seats at 1:45 so they could do this vote quickly. As you alluded to, almost all of them were. The enduring mystery of this day, as it stands right now, is where was Rand Paul, and what was he up to till 2:15 or so, when he apparently rolled up outside one of the doors to the Senate, ran in, not in proper dress code, so didn't come all the way even into the chamber, but simply shouted his no vote and took back off. That took some of the luster out of the moment. It extended it a little bit, but as you heard from the voices cheering on the floor, that joy was still there. By the way, including Mitt Romney, one of the few Republicans to stay on the floor after the vote was concluded, standing up in his seat and applauding Judge Jackson.
What's interesting, Garrett, and we're going to talk sort of about the sweeping nature of this moment in just a second, but let's get into the politics of this, right? Because the important context here is the way that this particular vote and this confirmation process, as we've seen over the last couple years, highlights just how partisan this has been, right? Look at the confirmations over the last 30 years. Look at what happened with Justices Antonin Scalia, Ruth Bader Ginsburg. You know, we're talking big lopsided numbers in the 90s for some of them, right? Now these votes, as you look in the bottom right-hand corner of your screen, they're a whole lot closer. You know, Neil Gorsuch, Brett Kavanaugh, Amy Coney Barrett, Ketanji Brown Jackson. It feels like we may have entered a point of no return when it comes to these incredibly high-profile picks that are incredibly important to the presidents of each party.
Yeah, and depending on who you ask, different folks up here will point to different moments being the thing that precipitated that, whether it was the Republican blockade against Merrick Garland or their decision later to lower the threshold for judges, for the Supreme Court justices to 50 votes. Republicans will say it was Democrats who started it earlier by changing the rules for lower court nominees. But regardless, you have seen this increasing politicization around the Supreme Court. And some lawmakers recognize that some of that is the court looks more political as Congress looks more dysfunctional and less able to address their needs, just sort of kicking things off to the courts. The fact that this was a bipartisan vote today, however narrow, I think is widely acknowledged would be good for the legitimacy of both the Senate process and for the court itself. And I can tell you from my conversations with some of those Republicans who did vote for Judge Jackson, their votes were in part to show that this process, they hope, isn't irrevocably broken, that you can still pick someone purely based on their qualifications, not just whether they wear the same political jersey or you think they do, as does your president. You know, I think the big test, Hallie, and maybe we'll see it this presidency, maybe we won't, will be whether a seat comes up that could change the balance of power in the court, or whether a nominee of one party's president has to be confirmed by a Senate of the other party. Those will be true tests of the system that we may see in the coming years.
Garrett, I'm going to do something a little bit annoying here, because I don't know if you've actually seen this breaking news, because you've been talking to me on the air, so I'm sorry. But Susan Collins, we've been talking about her. Her spokesperson is just confirming she has tested positive for COVID. She is now yet another high-profile person on Capitol Hill that we've seen test positive. I bring this up because, again, it's breaking news just into us, and because she was, I think, such a key part of this historic vote we're talking about. She was on the floor today, right?
Yeah, with every other member, none of them, or perhaps very few of them, wearing masks. Mask wearing has been kind of out of fashion, particularly on the Senate side, especially among Republicans, really for quite some time now. The Capitol has opened back up. Some of these COVID precautions have started to go by the wayside, and we are very much in the middle of a mini COVID outbreak here on Capitol Hill, with the Speaker, obviously, the big headline today, and a number of other lawmakers announcing in recent days that they have tested positive. Most of them have been either asymptomatic or mildly symptomatic. I certainly hope that's the case with Senator Collins, but a reminder that we are still in it, Hallie. Yeah,
mild symptoms, according to her spokesperson. You have to think, Garrett, we might start to see more and more of these statements, bracing for that possibility as the week goes on. And questions, too, Garrett, about this event, I shouldn't say where, but this event tomorrow at the White House, right? They're supposed to have a fairly big celebration with President Biden, Judge Jackson, et cetera.
Yeah, and you suspect there are probably political and medical considerations being made here. Democrats want to put this moment in a bottle. They want to get as much out of it as they possibly can, and they want to celebrate what will be an achievement of the Biden White House and of the bloc that voted for Judge Jackson for decades to come. And they want also, for political and personal reasons, I think, to move past COVID restrictions and COVID raining on everybody's parade all the time. COVID has other feelings about this.
Garrett Hake, live for us on Capitol Hill. Garrett, thank you for that great breakdown. Appreciate it. I want to bring in now, as promised, Michelle Sindora, and let's talk about some of the things we just discussed with Garrett. Setting aside the breaking news just into us on Senator Collins here and her COVID diagnosis, again, mild symptoms. You also have what you heard from her and the other Republicans who voted for Judge Jackson, and some of the Democrats too, real consternation over what they see as a problem with the partisan way that these processes happen. So there is a problem, they say. What's the solution?
Well, that's a great question, but they don't actually have a solution. You heard Lisa Murkowski when she was announcing her support for Ketanji Brown Jackson, going to be Justice Jackson soon. She called it awful, the process of the Supreme Court nomination. She also, in some ways, is emblematic of what is so broken people think about this process, which is that it was so rare for her to say, as a Republican, I'm going to go against my conference and vote for this. I also talked to one of Ketanji Brown Jackson's friends, and she said to me that she found watching that process painful and got emotional talking about it. So you really have this feeling both inside the Capitol, but also among Americans just watching the process that something's wrong. But both sides sort of have their issues with the process, but both sides also have, in some ways, have been guilty based on the other side of being part of the problem.
You mentioned this interview that you did with some of Judge Jackson's friends, which we're going to get to, because this moment, is really important. And it's not lost, I think, on anybody that it was Vice President Kamala Harris, presiding over this moment, as she is a history-making figure herself. Here's what she said right after the vote. Our Hill team caught up with her. Watch.
She will bring her lived experiences as a Black woman, as a mother, as a professional working woman, all of her lived experiences to the table as she is presiding over cases, and it will provide a different lens, a different perspective, a much needed perspective.
Obviously, that was not Vice President Harris. That was somebody you talked to, one of Judge Jackson's friends.
That was Antoinette Coakley.
Tell us about
it. Antoinette Coakley is one of a number of friends that I talked to, along with Nina Simmons and Kimberly Robinson. These are women who met Judge Jackson either in college at Harvard or at Harvard Law. They've kind of become her squad. They've kind of become her group chat. These are the women that when she's needing support, these are the people that she goes to. And what her friend was saying was that she's someone who's going to bring this amazing lived experience in her mind. And she's going to be a Black woman coming there, having broken this double pane glass ceiling that exists for Black women. And she's going to be able to have a perspective that Antoinette said is much needed. I also should tell you about Antoinette in particular. She literally predicted that her friend would be the first Black woman on the Supreme Court.
Like years ago?
When they were at Harvard Law. She said that because she was so brilliant and so smart. And she said, we all were friends, but she was the star.
That's so interesting. When you talk about, as you look at what Judge Jackson will face when she becomes Justice Justice Jackson, June, July, we think. There's some big stuff, right, on the plate of the Supreme Court next term.
That's right. And one of the biggest cases, the affirmative action case, Judge Jackson said in her hearing that she's going to recuse herself because she's on a board at Harvard. The other things that they might be looking at are gun rights. They might also be looking at some January 6 cases. We should remind people that Judge Jackson, soon to be Justice Jackson, was the one who said presidents are not kings, right, when she was allowing documents that former President Trump wanted to be withheld to go forward. So there are a number of cases on the Supreme Court. There's one thing she's not going to be hearing, at least from what I can tell, is the big abortion case that is supposed to be heard before she gets on the court. Right. But also she's 51, so there are 30 probably plus years, maybe more for her to go. So she's going to be hearing a lot of stuff, and she's going to be part of our national consciousness for a long time. Yamiche Alcindor, thank you so much. We're looking forward to seeing more of your interview with Judge Jackson's friends coming up tonight over on MSNBC on The Readout at 7 o'clock Eastern. Thanks, Yamiche. Turning now to news overseas and the war in Ukraine. And the Kremlin, interestingly, listen to this, today, acknowledging, really for one of the first times, they don't do this a lot, acknowledging that Russia, yes, has had major losses in this war. Watch.
We have significant losses of troops, and it's a huge tragedy for us. The troops were really withdrawn from that region as an act of a goodwill to lift tension from those regions.
That was the spokesperson for Vladimir Putin, the spokesperson for President Zelensky, saying there's absolutely no reason to believe anything he's saying. Remember, this is the same Kremlin that said before the war they had no plans to invade. Then they did. At the same time, you're looking at Secretary of State Tony Blinken overseas today. He was talking with his NATO counterparts in Brussels on how to isolate Russia even more and how to help Ukraine's military even more. With the United Nations officially suspending Russia from the Human Rights Council, that's a move that the U.S. has really pushed after multiple reports of the killings and torture of innocent people in the town of Bucha. And what happened there is what they're trying to stop over in the eastern region, because local officials there are bracing. They are bracing for the potential for a huge Russian attack. With the governor of Luhansk, you see that? That's the region, if you look on the right of your map, basically telling people to get out now, get out ASAP. Hallie is here with me now. And Hallie, there's a couple of pieces of this, right? Because it's not too often we hear Russia talk about significant losses from the war. Give us your sense of this assessment, this acknowledgement, as you have now Dmitry Peskov, the spokesperson for Vladimir Putin, also saying, well, we pulled out of the area around Kyiv as a sign of goodwill.
Hey, Hallie. Well, it is very significant that they're acknowledging this. I mean, just to give you one statistic, in the Soviet-Afghan war, they lost roughly the same number of troops that they've lost here, according to Ukrainian officials, which we can't independently confirm. But if that is the same number, they lost the same number of people in 10 years in Afghanistan than they have here in 43 days. So that is a massive loss, and it shows just how hard the Ukrainians are fighting. And also, getting kicked off the Human Rights Council at the UN shows that the UN is saying that, what they've done in this country goes completely against the values of the UN. Now, they're a permanent member of the UN Security Council. They can't kick them off that, but they've kicked them off the Human Rights Council. And that's saying that Russia just isn't fit to decide on any human rights issues, given what they've done in this country and in places like Bucha.
You have officials in eastern Ukraine that are bracing for this attack from Russian forces. The Ukrainian foreign minister today at this meeting with Secretary Blinken and other, in his message to NATO allies said, here's what we need. Here's what's on my agenda. Weapons, weapons, weapons. They're being really clear about it, as the governor of that region of Luhansk we talked about posted this video on Facebook telling people, like, this is it. This is your last shot at evacuating, right?
Exactly right. They're telling them, don't get trapped in the eastern Donetsk region like people got trapped in Mariupol. Before this huge onslaught from the Russians come on, get out while you can. Get out in your private cars. If the Red Cross can't get you out, hitch a ride and get out of there, because there is going to be an all-out assault, according to all military assessments, in that area. And just to give you an idea of how bad these places are when they get isolated and hemmed in from the Russians, speak to anybody from Mariupol, the experiences they've had there. We spoke to a lady who escaped from Mariupol 2 weeks ago, and she's painted a horrifying account. Let's take a listen to what she had to say.
I was living happily with my family. Who gave the right to those barbarians to steal our lives and make us miserable, to inflict such misery on people? People have lost their families. I still don't know what has happened to my sister and my nephew.
So it's just not just losing your house, your business, but it's being torn away from your family and, not knowing what's happened to any of them. And this is the cost of the war Russia has waged on the Ukrainian people.
Hallie Arouzi live for us there in Lviv. Hallie, thank you so much. We've got some breaking news to tell you about as we keep up our international coverage out of Israel. Just in the last few hours, at least 2 people have been killed. Several more have been hurt after a shooting in central Tel Aviv. It happened in this busy part of the city that's known for its restaurants and its bars. Still not clear what's behind the shooting, why it happened, but there have been a series of attacks just like this one over the last few weeks. Right around this time last year, protests and clashes between Israelis and Palestinians ignited an 11-day Gaza war. We're going to stay on top of this story and bring you any updates as we get them. Back here in Washington, we learned this afternoon that the House January 6th committee is considering an interview with former President Trump. That's what a source familiar told NBC News. At about the same time, we learned that New York Attorney General Letitia James filed a request today to hold Mr. Trump in civil contempt for not turning over some of these documents that she wants and that she subpoenaed him for. So now she wants the judge to fine Mr. Trump $10,000 a day until he turns over those documents. It's part of her civil investigation into the Trump Organization over allegations the company inflated financial statements for more than 2 years. The organization, the Trump Org, says they haven't done anything wrong in this investigation and that they are, quote, on track, in their view, to meet an April 15th deadline to turn over those documents. Joining me now is Hallie Vitale. So a couple of pieces here, Hallie, and let me start with this January 6th committee. If, and this is a huge if here, but if Donald Trump were to talk with them, he would obviously be their biggest witness, right? This is the big fish that they've been trying to go after. And what's interesting here, he hasn't totally closed the door yet. He told the Washington Post it depends on what the request is.
Yeah, but that's also a very Trump-like answer, as you and I know, because we've covered him for so many years. He loves the drama of these moments, and he loves the idea that he can stoke these flames, which is clearly what he's doing in that Washington Post interview when he's asked by Josh Dawsey, will you testify before the committee? And he says, well, it depends what the request is. It depends what the ask is. I'm also really glad that you framed this as such a huge if, because as big a fish as Donald Trump would be for this committee, that's as big an if exists about whether or not they're going to actually ask him to appear. Right now, what our sources are telling us is that they are considering that, but that's always been one of the subtexts here for this committee. Whether or not they're actually going to end up going after Donald Trump, trying to compel him to testify, or whether they're going to do what they did with Ivanka Trump, who they just spoke to a few days ago, and just ask him, not subpoena him. And that's a pretty important question and strategy here, because we've seen what happens when the committee has subpoenaed people close to Donald Trump. Mark Meadows, Peter Navarro, Dan Scavino, Steve Bannon, all of them have been referred to the Justice Department for contempt referrals. Hasn't gone well. They haven't gotten the compliance they wanted. If they were to go after Donald Trump, they'd have to be really sure that they had the strategy down to actually get him in front of that committee.
Then there's this piece, as we talk about the former president, of these investigations against him, multiple investigations, one criminal. And today the Manhattan District Attorney has said, yes, we're still doing this investigation. We just can't really talk about it, right? And then you have the New York Attorney General, not a criminal investigation, saying, listen, we want to get these documents. The Trump Org says, we've been complying. We're going to meet your deadline. Where does this go?
Yeah, well, right now it goes to the fines that you are talking about, that the New York Attorney General is asking be levied against Trump, $10,000 a day for each day that he does not comply. But the specific records that they're looking for here, they're talking about filing cabinets that were used by the Trump Organization, Post-it notes that were used by the former president to allegedly communicate with employees. They're trying to get all of that information as they seek to further this civil suit here in the state of New York. It also comes against the backdrop, though, Hallie, it's not just documents that are at issue in this moment. There's a separate but parallel moment happening where Donald Trump Jr. and Ivanka Trump have been asked to testify, and their lawyers are fighting that as well. So fighting on a lot of different fronts here as all of these different legal probes, both in New York and then, of course, here on the Hill, all seem to converge at one point, and that's Trump.
A lot of moving pieces on that front today, for sure. Hallie Vitale, live on the Hill. Thank you. So we just found out as we were coming on the air tonight that 2 sources are telling NBC News that the Secret Service is doing an internal review into a story that, honestly, kind of feels made for the movies, right? Stay with me here. These 2 guys just wrapped their first court appearance after being arrested by the FBI here in D.C. for allegedly pretending to be federal agents. Court documents say Aryan Taherzadeh and Haider Ali kept this scheme going for a couple of years, convincing other federal agents, including one currently on the First Lady's security detail, that they were the real deal. The documents say Taherzadeh even gave Secret Service members things like rent-free apartments, iPhones, surveillance systems, and the use of what he said were government vehicles. But the jig was up when a U.S. postal inspector showed up at their apartment building to investigate an alleged assault that they were said to be witnesses to. They told investigators they were with the U.S. Special Police Investigation Unit, and the FBI was like, that is a complete lie. Today in court, a U.S. attorney said law enforcement found a passport for Ali stamped with Pakistani and Iranian visas during a search of his apartment, and said Ali made claims he had connections to the Pakistani intel service. The U.S. government has not verified those claims. Let me bring in now Kristen Welker. And Kristen, I feel like the question here is like, how did they do this for so long, convincing actual federal agents that they were also one of them?
I spoke to a law enforcement official, Hallie, who said that is the key question. That's what they're trying to figure out. They just don't understand how these two suspects were so convincing. So just to again reiterate some of the key headlines here, those two suspects, Aryan Taherzadeh and Haider Ali, had their first court appearance today. They were charged with impersonating Department of Homeland Security agents. Now, prosecutors say the men were trying to ingratiate themselves to the Secret Service agents, and one of the suspects is accused of giving those agents lavish gifts, including free apartments, if you can believe it, as well as weapons. Now, prosecutors say Ali told witnesses he was affiliated with Pakistani intelligence, though the government has not yet verified those claims. The men were arrested Wednesday right here in D.C., where law enforcement officials say they found a passport for Ali stamped with Pakistani and Iranian visas. Officials also recovered weapons and tactical gear. Now, 4 Secret Service agents connected to the case have been placed on administrative leave, and that includes one who was detailed to the First Lady's office, Hallie, and we have been told that there is an internal investigation going on right now, as well as an internal review within the Secret Service. As you know, this is an agency that is no stranger to controversy, Hallie.
But you have to wonder what kind of security concerns. I would imagine the questions that this raises about security concerns inside the Secret Service now, are pretty real.
Very real. And of course, when you have one of the agents who is on the protective detail for the First Lady, at least for a period of time, I'm told that that wasn't an indefinite detail, that is going to raise alarm bells. And so that is why you have this internal review being conducted within the Secret Service, Hallie. And again, it does come against the backdrop of all of these other incidents, many of which you and I covered going all the way back to 2012, that trip in Cartagena, Colombia, when a number of agents were ousted amid misconduct on that trip, including soliciting prostitutes. There was another incident in 2014 when a knife-wielding man actually got into the front door of the White House, which wasn't locked at the time. That's against protocol. And then there was an incident when 2 Secret Service agents who were inebriated crashed into a barrier outside of the White House. And so there has been a lot of internal reviews that have happened since those incidents. There have been a number of structural changes that have taken place, Hallie, but this is undoubtedly yet another moment when the Secret Service is going to take another hard look at what's happening inside its own agency, Hallie.
Kristen Welker, great to see you. Thank you very much for bringing us the latest on that. Let's talk about weather, because you've got this new round of dangerous storms. And boy, have we been talking about dangerous storms, right? Well, they are barreling towards the southeast as we speak. It's been hammering the region really all week long. There have been 65 tornado reports across 6 states just since Monday, from Texas to South Carolina. And forecasters say it's not going to necessarily get any better. They think these storms are going to reload, and then for the 4th week in a row, wreak havoc, potentially. The threat of bad conditions still going strong today, with 6 million people at risk. Governor Brian Kemp in Georgia has declared a state of emergency. That is the state where we find our Sam Brock. And Sam, at this point, it's like cleanup, but it's cleanup with this shadow hanging over people of more storms to come.
The fear of what's to come, no doubt about it, Hallie. And of the 65 to 70 reported tornadoes so far that we've heard of, about 30 of them are right here in Georgia, so roughly half. And we know that when you're talking about severe weather, it is cruel and it's arbitrary in terms of who it affects. Look at some of this video, just about 2.5 hours south of where we are in Decatur. This is Leslie, Georgia. You can see a funnel cloud appear in a field there and just rip right through, coming at the storm chasers. You can hear them saying, back up, as they're trying to pull away. That happened to be in the middle of nowhere. Should that enter a population center, you're looking at a very different scenario than so far. 1 person killed in Georgia, 3 total throughout the South as a result of these 70 or so reported tornadoes. So much of it is just a matter of inches or feet where tornadoes land. And it's not just tornadic activity, but also severe weather in general. I'm in Decatur. Over my shoulder here a couple of days ago, there was a giant tree in between these 2 homes. A lightning bolt split it, hit one house on this side, striking the master bedroom. Right next to that, there was a woman who was 2 feet away sleeping. And then on the other side, there's a living room here on this side of the equation. There was a woman on the other side of the hallway. She had happened to move from that specific room down to her office because she was worried about the storms coming in. So much of this depends on where you are and when. Amazing right now that the fatalities right now are only at 3.
Yeah. And it is devastating. It is also just, in some instances, timing and luck, as you say, Sam. Sam Brock, thank you. Good to see you. A court in Turkey is now transferring the murder trial of Jamal Khashoggi to Saudi Arabia. 26 Saudis are accused of killing the Washington Post journalist inside the Saudi consulate in Istanbul in 2018. Human rights groups are slamming this decision by Turkey. They say it is scandalous, since they believe essentially the case will fall apart and will not get justice for Khashoggi or the people who loved him. Number 2, Puerto Rico, right now in the dark after a power outage left more than 1 million people without electricity. It happened after a fire started at a big power plant there. Schools and offices, I mean, look at this. They had to shut down, obviously. Officials say it's the biggest blackout across the U.S. territory this year. Crews are still working to try to get the lights back on. You got to hope they'll do it soon. Number 3, noted conspiracy theorist Alex Jones finally sat down for some court depositions after paying $75,000 in fines. This is over a defamation lawsuit filed by families of the victims of the Sandy Hook school shooting. They say the InfoWars host claimed the shooting was a hoax. A judge found Jones in contempt and fined him for every day that he didn't show up to court. Number 4, researchers say they've pinpointed genes connected to schizophrenia. This is a new study that found that mutations in 10 very specific genes can really increase somebody's chances of developing the disease. Scientists say this is a big deal because it could be a breakthrough to help diagnose and treat schizophrenia better. Number 5, astronomers may have found what might be the most distant galaxy ever seen. HD1. It's about 13.5 billion light years away. The group at the University of Tokyo says they need to observe it more. They need to check it out a little longer to see what exactly it is celestially, but they say it's a big deal. So space nerds, rejoice. This afternoon, 2 more black NFL coaches, Steve Wilks and Ray Horton, are joining former Miami Dolphins head coach Brian Flores in his race discrimination suit against the NFL. So Wilks was the head coach with the Arizona Cardinals for just 1 season back in 2018. His lawyers saying he faced discrimination as what they call a bridge coach and was never given any meaningful chance to succeed. Then there's Horton. He was the defensive coordinator of the Tennessee Titans, who interviewed for the head coach position before the 2016 season. Something his lawyers say was a total sham interview to comply with this league rule that we've talked about here on this show, the so-called Rooney Rule, that requires people of color to be interviewed for head coaching jobs. The Titans hired Mike Mularkey, who is white, for the job instead. And last year, he acknowledged that he regretted knowing it was a fake hiring process. Listen to this.
I sat there knowing I was the head coach in 16, knowing a lot of the coaches that they were interviewing, knowing how much they prepared to go through those interviews, knowing that everything they could do, and they had no chance of getting that job.
That podcast was last year. Emily Aketa is joining us now, but it's getting a lot of attention because it's now being cited in this suit, which specifically asks for more transparency in NFL hiring. No comment from the NFL today, but tell us a little bit more about the latest twist in this one.
Hey there, Hallie. So, okay, let's start with Steve Wilks.
Sure.
He was fired just a year after coaching for the Arizona Cardinals. And, you know, it was a losing season, but really what the lawsuit is getting at is that the GM stayed on despite missing preseason for a DUI conviction and making so-called poor personnel decisions. The Arizona Cardinals deny any kind of discrimination allegations. Then moving to Ray Horton, who you mentioned, that really taps into to the Rooney Rule, which, as you mentioned, this really requires teams to hire requires teams to consider a diverse platform of candidates for top positions. But as you heard in the podcast, and really what the lawsuit's main concern is that despite the Rooney Rule, that these teams are not seriously considering the minority candidates, and they already have someone in mind before even fully interviewing and evaluating everyone, Hallie.
In a statement, Wilkes says that when Flores filed this lawsuit, he owed it to himself and all black NFL coaches to stand with him. And I wonder, based on your reporting, where you see this movement going, if you will, for the NFL, which is facing a bit of a reckoning on this front.
So I will say, I think it's hard to say, but in speaking with sports analysts, they say there is strength in numbers. And even with just 2 more people joining this complaint, we could see more feeling encouraged and gaining the confidence to speak out. So this may continue to expand. It's certainly a discussion that we're going to be continuing to follow, Hallie.
Emily Ikeda, thank you so much for bringing that to us tonight. Appreciate it. Today in a courtroom in Virginia, a former police officer testified against a fellow ex-cop, telling a jury they stormed the Capitol hoping to, in his view, overturn the results of the 2020 presidential election, a legitimate election. Jacob Fracker testified in the trial of Thomas Robertson. You see the 2 pictures here. Fracker has the hat on, right? That's the 2 of them. He said they both thought the election was stolen from former President Donald Trump. Of course, that's not true. It was not a stolen election. Fracker, who was a witness for the prosecution, told the jury he also felt other officers should have been on their side instead of trying to hold the rioters back. Fracker pleaded guilty to a felony charge last month. Robertson, who's facing 6 charges, including entering restricted grounds and impeding law enforcement, could find out, his legal fate, if you will, any day now. We think closing arguments will be tomorrow. I want to bring in Ryan Riley. You've been watching all this, Ryan. You've been covering all this in court. And we previewed this a little bit earlier this week. 2 buddies, one now testifying against the other in a pretty dramatic fashion.
Indeed, and they had a very close relationship. Actually, they called each other father and son. And after they were arrested last January, Fracker actually had his daughter go over to his former colleague's house, and was actually, as they went in to turn themselves to the FBI, his daughter was being watched by his friend's wife. So this was a very close relationship. He actually went through training with him. So it's a very close relationship. And then we have a situation where he lends him money afterwards, where after they're arrested, actually, Robertson gave $30,000 to Fracker. That's how close a relationship this was, and now he's turned against him.
So how did the testimony play in court today?
It was pretty emotional, I think, at some points. It was certainly very dramatic, where you had this situation where up until a month ago, they were this united front. They were both going to go to trial. And then all of a sudden, there is this flip.
A crack.
Yeah, and basically what he explained after being asked by the prosecution was that he has his daughter, and he was realizing that he had exposure of up to 20 years in one case, but if he made this deal, it cuts down to under 5. So he was really sort of thinking of his kid, he said, when he decided to take this deal.
And you think closing arguments are going to be tomorrow, right? That's the assessment?
Closing arguments start tomorrow morning. And if it takes the trajectory of the last jury trial, that could be a very quick verdict we get, because that only took about 2 to 3 hours on the last time around. So it depends what happens here. We'll have to see how the jury handles this.
Real quick, talk about how the defense tried to rebut what the jury heard from them today.
Well, so there's this issue with the stick and a walking stick that he says he brought. He says it was referred to as his old man cane, but that's what the prosecution says that he was actually using as a weapon on that day, and tried to impede officers by inserting it as they were trying to walk up to the Capitol. So that stick is really a key element to this trial.
Defense is saying he needed it for his own
health. He was walking so long, he thought he was going to be walking around. That's what he was using it for.
Ryan Riley, good to see you. Thank you for staying on top of this beat. Always glad to have you on the show.
Thanks for having me.
Appreciate it. Coming up, a few months ago, some big-name banks cut ties with the Trump Organization. So now it appears they have to borrow money from this internet-only, kind of obscure bank. In tonight's Backstory, Gretchen Morganson takes us behind the scenes of this big investigation into Axos Financial. Plus, how a California woman says she accidentally won $10 million from a lotto ticket. Must be nice. We're talking about that in The Local. It's finally here. MLB's opening day. Actual baseball games are being played today. One just wrapped up, just a few weeks after that lockout that people worried could cancel the whole season. We've got more on the action today in just a couple of minutes. But first, NBC News covers hundreds of stories every day. And because you couldn't possibly read or watch or listen to them all, our bureau teams have done it for you. This is what they tell us is going down in their regions in a segment we call The Local. From our Northeast Bureau, New York City police say they're still looking for whoever was behind an arson attack at a gay bar in Brooklyn. A man walked into the Rash Bar, they say, poured what seemed to be gas all over the floor and lit a match. The place went up in flames. 2 people got burned, but they seem to be doing okay. Officials say that whoever did it left the gas can at the scene. They're asking for help to find him. From our Southeast Bureau, drone delivery company Wing has launched a new service out in North Texas. Google's parent company, Alphabet, and Walgreens partnered up so that people who live in Dallas-Fort Worth can get stuff and then have it dropped off via drone on their doorstep. Look at that video. Like, the future is here, man. The drones can go 65 miles an hour. They can carry 3 pounds of your favorite toothpaste or gummy worms, whatever you order. And from our West Coast Bureau, the luckiest accident in the world, maybe, for a woman in Southern California. She won $10 million after pushing the wrong button on a scratch-off machine at a supermarket. How? She said some rude person bumped into her. She was actually going to get a cheaper ticket, but then, her finger slipped. That's not just fate, that's karma right there. Time now to get the backstory, our behind-the-scenes look at how a story comes together and how it fits into our bigger picture. And tonight, we've got a deeper look at an NBC News scoop. This one on the Trump Organization, which used to borrow money from big-name banks, but not anymore. Now it's getting a loan from a little-known bank called Axos Financial, according to the New York City Finance Department. Axos is this kind of obscure internet-only bank based out of San Diego and Vegas that helped refinance Trump Tower in New York just a couple months ago. By lending to the Trump Organization, Axos is doing what a lot of other big banks won't do: risk their assets with a troubled borrower who's had multiple bankruptcies and lots of lawsuits. The bigger names like Deutsche Bank and Signature cut ties with the Trump Organization after the January 6th insurrection, remember. So Gretchen Morgensen, one of our senior financial reporters for our investigative unit, looked into Axos and found internal documents and records that show they have a history of taking on unusual loans and are dealing with some controversy themselves. They're getting sued by 2 former employees who say they were wrongfully fired after raising questions about some of the company's practices. One employee says the bank, in their view, was trying to hide the fact it was breaking federal law. Axos denies that. The Trump Organization spokesperson has not responded to a request for comment on their deals with Axos, and Axos has declined to comment about the terms of the loan. Gretchen Morgensen is joining us now to talk more about this story and how it came together. And Gretchen, we're so glad to have you on the backstory. Thanks for being with us.
Anytime, Hallie.
And I think you know this segment a little bit. It's really a behind-the-scenes look at how this all happened. And for this one, I know worked a very long time on this story. It's super deep. It's complicated. There's a lot of backstory. How do you even start doing that research, even before you know whether or not this is a story, right, that merits that kind of resource-intensive deep dive?
Well, Hallie, we knew it was going to be newsworthy when the Trump Tower mortgage, $100 million mortgage, was refinanced. And so then when that happened, you just really wanted to dig in to see more about this bank. What sets it apart? What is it about? When did it get founded? It's a relatively new bank, started in 2000. It's internet only, doesn't have branches. It's relatively small. This is a pretty big loan for a bank the size of Axos. So you really just wanted to dig in and see sort of what this bank is all about. And, luckily, there are a lot of public documents that you can look at. As you know, banks are very heavily regulated. And so there were some documents that really pointed to what the bank does and its preferences. But the bank's website, too, was a real treasure trove because they say they're different. They're certainly the first to say we are a different bank. So that's how I really wanted to get started and dig in.
Well, what's interesting is how, this piece, as many pieces you do, involves, lawsuits and controversy. And as you talk about records that you need to kind of keep track of and find out about here, you've been covering, the financial industry and sort of the broader world of this for a while. How much of this was like source building? How much of this is working to try to obtain some of these internal documents, et cetera?
Well, the internal documents came out of a lawsuit. And of course, as you know, lawsuits are always very, informative. And of course, they're only allegations until they're adjudicated. But there are sometimes documents that come out in the lawsuits that are very helpful. But, this is a public bank. It's publicly traded on the New York Stock Exchange. That means they have to file Securities and Exchange Commission documents. And of course, there are land records about loans that they make. So, when you're looking at a bank, there is quite a lot of information that's available.
Gretchen Morgensen, it's incredible reporting. It is a deep dive. We're so glad to have you sharing a little bit of like how the sausage gets made. So thank you very much. Come back again soon. Appreciate it.
Anytime, Hallie.
Coming up, Tiger Woods, he's back at the Masters. And you know what? Not too terrible of a start, especially since it's only been a year since that horrific car crash that almost cost him a leg. We're going to have a look at his hopes for an epic comeback when we come back. Tiger Woods back on the golf course today at the Masters, finishing his day 1 under par at a tournament he's won 5 times before, making his return 14 months after that car crash that left him with leg injuries so bad that at one point he says doctors were considering amputation. This week, Woods said the hardest part for him wouldn't be the golf, it would be just walking the course. And if you watched at all today, you may have noticed he's not wearing his signature Nikes. He says he needs something a little more stable, considering he's got all these rods and screws in his leg. Let me bring in Morgan Chesky in Augusta. So, Morgan, let me start with like how he did. He's won this tournament many times before. So, middle of the pack isn't really where Tiger's used to. But also, this is a year after he almost lost a leg in a car crash. So, all things considered, that's not too bad.
Not too bad, and frankly, incredible, Hallie, right? I mean, he finishes 1 under 14 months after that accident, but he's on the leaderboard. He's 1 under par. That's just a few strokes behind the leaders here. And keep in mind, there are golfers who are far younger, who have won more recently, that still finished today's round 1, 2, 3 over, right? And so to have Tiger come out here, particularly with the fact that his right leg is surgically repaired, is nothing short of a miracle. And he did have a chance, while we can't share it with you, he did speak after today's round, and he essentially said he was happy with today's performance. He was certainly aware of his certain physical limitations, but he was hitting the ball like he wanted to. And so to hear that from him, knowing the hurdles he was having to overcome coming into today's round, I think fans particularly are incredibly excited to see him potentially make the cut. That would have him playing through the weekend and potentially be in contention on Sunday. I mean, that would be
unbelievable.
Tiger
That would be, I mean, one of the biggest sports stories for sure the year, I would think, Morgan. Can you talk more about the fans?
Maybe ever. Yeah, absolutely.
So what was it like? I mean, he always has throngs of people around him when he is near a golf ball. You know what I mean? Was it just bananas today there?
I've been told the Tiger effect was in full effect today at Augusta National. A small army of fans following him from hole to hole. I did speak with a reporter who was on the course today, and he says when Tiger makes a birdie putt, it just sounds different than when somebody else makes one. When Tiger has a great drive, you're going to hear about it. That's the impact that he has when he goes to the Masters. I mean, it's also been said that, you know, you could play the Masters naked, and if Tiger Woods is on the course, nobody's going to know. Right? That's the kind of draw that he has.
Has that always been said?
On a tournament like this.
I didn't know that was a thing that people always said. I learned something today, Morgan.
I've heard it more than twice, so I feel comfortable sharing.
I'm going to use that in full effect in my own life. Wait, so when do we, you know I'm not a golf person, when will we know if Tiger Woods makes the cut or not? Like, when are we going to know whether he's going to play over the weekend?
It's going to be sometime on Friday.
Okay.
That's when, after the second round, they'll know who's going to be going into the weekend. And after today, a lot of people are saying that he has a good shot if he stays consistent. Now, a big part of that is going to be recovery, right? He's 46 years old.
Yeah.
It's a totally different approach to the game now than whenever he was in his younger years. And he has a team around him that even talked about it today after the first round. He's getting into an ice bath tonight. And then tomorrow morning when he wakes up, you know, it's going to be more than a few stretches. He's going to have heat applied to the muscles to try to wake them up. Of course, he's going to go warm out on the course before he goes out for the second round. But he has this down to a science. He has to be a little more careful. Everything is more thought out because you can't just rely on pure athleticism anymore. And so we're seeing a little bit different Tiger Woods than we would have seen, you know, 10, 20 years ago.
Morgan Chesky, great front row seats to all of it, Morgan. I'm sure we'll talk again tomorrow. I have a feeling. Appreciate it. So if you're watching this show right now, can we just be, like, honest with each other? If you're watching this, you're probably not a Cubs or a Brewers fan because you were probably watching the Cubs and Brewers game. It's opening day in Chicago. with the first game of the 2022 MLB season ending as we were coming on the air. And listen, a good day for the home crowd there in friendly confines. Chicago beating Milwaukee 5-4, and kind of an exciting day across baseball with 7 games today. But interestingly, not as full of a schedule as usual, with delays and cancellations because of that bad weather we've been telling you about. And my team in D.C. here is one of them, the Nats. The Washington Nationals have pushed back their opener with the New York Mets by a few hours because of rain. Should still happen tonight. Jesse Kirsch is at Chicago's Wrigley Field. So I have to think people are psyched. Baseball is back. This lockout threat that was going to maybe keep the season from us is gone, right?
Yeah, and by the way, you hear the wind blowing right now. We just had a little bit of rain coming through here in Chicago, but it held off long enough for the Cubs to win 5-4. A pretty exciting game back and forth. We could hear people screaming from inside the ballpark. So this weather, the lockout issues, people are past it, and they are excited to have baseball back here, Hallie.
It looks Ms., Jesse. Can I be honest? Like, I don't want to be standing out there for that live shot, but people are probably psyched, and all these poor people in their jackets behind you. Because, like, listen, we saw a delay with this lockout. USA Today reporting just 2 of the 7 games today got sold out. There are impacts from this lockout, so it's interesting to see these fans behind you. I know you've been talking with some folks in Chicago there about how this all plays out.
Yeah, and, one of the things that a business owner here told me is that with the lockout, if it had continued, it would have felt like COVID all over again because it effectively shuts down the majority of their business. He compares Wrigley Field, where I am, one of the most iconic arenas in all of sport, to the Eiffel Tower. He says it's more than just a ballpark. And so his location, right? Location. And so here's what he told us about what happens to his business if you take away all of the Cubs' home games in a regular season.
It would have been catastrophic, and after coming out of the pandemic, it would have been disastrous.
Would have been COVID all over.
It would have been COVID all over, and it would have been very, very difficult to come out of it.
But they are past that lockout. Opening day has come. The fans are funneling out. And you know what's right across the street, Hallie? All of those bars and restaurants. Get on with it, friend. It's 5 o'clock somewhere in this country. So Jesse Kirsch, you will go. A lot of people will be looking at, Shohei Ohtani, for example, first MLB player on the cover of Time magazine in 17 years. It's going to be a heck of a season. You got a good gig, friend. Hope you're having fun. Thank you all for joining us for this hour. We're going to have more for you here tomorrow. Same time, same place. Coverage picks up right now.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.